Rick, it would be surprising to most Americans that a right as fundamental as the right to vote is not specifically guaranteed in our original Constitution. Why is that, Rick?
I'd say there's no right to vote for president guaranteed in the Constitution, because you have to remember at the time that the Constitution was passed, lots of people did not have the right to vote. You couldn't even vote for your senator. That was done by the state legislatures. It was only the passage of amendments that said, if you're going to grant the right to vote, don't discriminate on the basis of race or don't discriminate on the basis of gender. And so it's really been the courts more than the text of the Constitution that has protected the right to vote, and protected it only in the sense that once you grant the right to vote, you shouldn't have discrimination among voters who are eligible to vote. Well, I'd say the main lesson that political operatives learned from the Florida 2000 debacle was that in a really close election, the rules of the game matter. The form of the ballot, how you kick people off the rolls when they don't vote, what kind of identification do you have to show? What if you cast a ballot in the wrong precinct, the wrong voting precinct, because a poll worker told you to go to the wrong table in a gym? Those kinds of arcane rules that nobody really paid much attention to before Florida 2000, those rules matter when it's really close. And so partisans on both sides recognized that in a close election, the rules matter. And if the rules could be manipulated, it could affect the outcome of elections. It's led to what I've described as red state election law and blue state election law. What we're seeing in red states, these are states with Republican legislatures and governors, is that laws are being passed to make it harder for people to register and vote. What gets less attention, but what we're also seeing, is that in blue states, states like Oregon, California, we're seeing laws that make it easier for people to register and vote. When you change these rules on the margin, making it easier or harder to vote, you're affecting mostly Democratic voters, who tend to be the voters who, when these hurdles are put up, tend to vote less, and when these hurdles are taken down, tend to vote more. So on the margins, it's in the best interest of each political party to try to manipulate who gets to be part of the group that gets to cast ballots on Election Day.
What's the impact of gerrymandering today in our society, in our state legislatures, in our different districts around the country?
It's a really complicated question as to how gerrymandering affects political power. If we had more neutrally drawn districts where the people who are in charge didn't have the ability to draw their own districts, or if partisans didn't have the ability to draw districts to help their political party, probably we would have a set of legislatures and a Congress that more closely represented the views and the affiliations and the affinities of the people who actually live in the United States or in these states or jurisdictions.
This is a critical day for democratic participation in America. This decision by the court is a game changer and leaves virtually unprotected minority voters in communities all over this country.
2013, the Supreme Court rules in a case called Shelby County versus Holder that the essential provision of the Voting Rights Act, Section 5, the Preclearance provision that says that states with a history of race discrimination in voting have to get permission from the federal government before they could change their voting rules and have to prove that the change won't make protected minority voters worse off. Shelby knocks that out. And within 2 hours of Shelby knocking that out, the state of Texas announces it's going to start enforcing its strict voter ID law that had been put on hold by the Justice Department and then by a court. I think it's essential that Congress restore preclearance. And I don't know that I would necessarily limit preclearance to those states that were covered under the rules before the Supreme Court gutted them in 2013. We should design a voting system so that all eligible voters, but only eligible voters, can easily cast a ballot that will be fairly and accurately counted. You can say it in one sentence. It's not hard to do.
In your book, you coined this phrase, the fraudulent fraud squad. What is that?
So I've called some of the people who advance these arguments without good evidence members of the fraudulent fraud squad. They go around, they're on Fox News, they're at conservative think tanks, They're litigating cases. They're, in some cases, serving as chief election officers of states. And they go around making claims that voter fraud is rampant without good evidence to support it.
President-elect Trump has been quite active on Twitter, and he said, in addition to winning the Electoral College in a landslide, I won the popular vote if you deduct the millions of people who voted illegally.
The president-elect is absolutely correct when he says the number of illegal votes cast exceeds the popular vote margin between him and Hillary Clinton.
Our next guest, Greg Phillips, first tweeted the claim that 3 million people voted illegally. Do you know, and can you prove right now, that 3 million people voted illegally?
Yes.
Do you have the proof?
Yes.
Will you provide it?
Yes.
Can I have it?
No.
But it looks like 8 million dead people and illegals voted in the last election if you add population growth to the 2012. Because it was about 7 million voting illegally then. So maybe 8, 9, 10 million now? Like double, triple what Trump says? You cannot make this stuff up.
If you look at voter registration, you look at the dead people that are registered to vote, you're going to find, and we're going to do an investigation on it.
But 3 to 5 million illegal votes.
Well, we're going to find out.
And what's the end game? The end game is passing new restrictive voting laws that will make it harder for people who are likely to be poor, minority, very old or very young students, to make it harder for those people to be able to register and vote for no good reason. So if the question is, why has the voter fraud claim caught on, at least on the right, among regular people, I would say it's a combination of two factors. One is it's a constant drumbeat by members of the fraudulent fraud squad, and now led by the President of the United States, claiming that voter fraud is a major problem. When you're hearing the President of the United States claim it on Twitter, on television, he's claiming it all the time, and you're predisposed to believe it because, again, if my guy lost, it must be because there was some foul play or those people can't be trusted. So one reason is it's constantly repeated. The other is that we have a decline in mediating institutions in this country, especially media, which used to help voters figure out the truth. If you ask members of the public, should we require identification to vote? Most people say yes. When it's explained to them that lots of poor people don't have the kinds of ID that are required by the states. The state of Texas, concealed weapons permit, perfectly fine to vote. Student ID, not fine to vote. The kinds of IDs are what matter. And if you look, there have been academic studies looking at levels of public confidence in the election system. And whether or not a state has a strict voter ID law does not affect whether or not people are more confident or less confident about the election process. Best predictor of whether you're confident or not confident about the fairness of the election process, did my guy win? If my guy won, the election was fair and square. If the other guy won, there must have been something wrong with the election. And so really what's going on in a lot of these cases is it's about trying to gain a partisan advantage in a close election. And I don't think that should be a good enough reason to make it harder for people to register and to vote. And so when a state decides to pass a law that makes it harder to register or vote, the question that courts should ask, or the question that Congress should require through legislation that courts ask is, does the state have a good reason for doing that? And if you look at the reasons that have been offered to justify some of these most restrictive laws, they don't hold up. We know that the kind of fraud that voter ID laws, for example, are meant to prevent, that kind of fraud doesn't happen on any scale to influence elections. We're at a very challenging time. I don't want to sugarcoat it. So things were bad before the 2016 election. The amount of election litigation has more than doubled. It's up 23% in the 2016 election compared to 2012. States are passing stricter laws. Courts are dividing on party lines among the judges and deciding how to decide cases. All that's bad, but things have gotten much worse. We've got the President of the United States making unsubstantiated, wild, unsupported accusations of voter fraud. We have foreign interference in our elections, attempting to hack our voting systems. We have the rise of fake news and propaganda. It might take another national crisis like we had in 2000 or something else to really shake this country up and recognize again that we need to agree on some basic common principles. Free and fair elections, all eligible voters being able to easily register and vote, no means for election fraud or hacking into our election systems. These should not only be bipartisan, they should be done with professionals who know how to run elections, know how to run secure elections, and with people promoting means to ensure that we have a fair election process and one where people are not intimidated to vote, where people who are eligible to vote are not going to show up at the polling places and say that they're not registered, and where anybody who tries to commit voter fraud is going to easily be caught. These are achievable goals. What's missing is the political will to get it done.